Hey, what's going on YouTube? Richard here, aka Rykoan, coming to you from Geek Elite Radio, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about the Assassin's Creed movie, as well as my top 5 video game franchises that have been made into feature films. So with that, let's get started. Now, obviously, the film isn't out yet. It actually releases December 21st of this year, and it's the only Assassin's Creed title that fans will be able to get their hands on this year, as Ubisoft has moved the development cycle for the games into more than 1 year. Prior to that, the game had been an annual release, but some of the games had had some problems as of lately. We're looking at you, Unity. We're looking at you. That being said, though, Michael Fassbender will be taking on the protagonist in current-day time period named Calum Lynch, who discovers that his ancestor, Aguilar, was part of the Spanish Inquisition and the secret organization known as the Assassins. Now, with that being said, let's move into my top 5 video game to film franchise adaptations. Here we go with number 5. Alright, so our number 5 takes us all the way back to 2001, and I'm not talking Stanley Kubrick's Space Odyssey, although we are kind of talking about a space opera, if you will, in the film Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. Now I know I'm probably going to draw some hatred right off the bat for that even being on the list. A lot of people will argue that it's barely Final Fantasy, and that is probably a very valid argument. However, the thing that we cannot deny is the technological accomplishments of this film. I mean, this film did something way ahead of its time, and it's absolutely beautifully CG animated. I even remember seeing like the animated characters having like pinups in some of the magazines and things like that, and it was at the time a little bit difficult to tell whether or not that was CG or whether it was a photograph. And so for something to have that much visual fidelity back in 2001 and still hold up today, I think we have to put it on our list. Sure, I agree, the story's not great, but the story's also not awful. It's not the worst video game to film adaptation that's ever been done, and it probably, unfortunately, sadly, will not be the last. However, I do believe that it earns a spot at number 5 on this list for those technological reasons. Go back and watch the movie. It's still a beautifully animated film, all computer generated, and yes, there are certain key elements from Final Fantasy that are missing, and I know that, and that's unfortunate, but the film as it is not too terribly bad. It's an okay film. Alright, now it might shock some people to realize that the number 4 on our list comes just 2 years after the remarkably, horribly received Super Mario Bros. Film. Of course, we're talking 1995's Mortal Kombat. It's pretty crazy to me to think that Paul W.S. Anderson took Mortal Kombat, a video game franchise about fighting, and turned it into a feature-length film. Now, granted, that's not to say that the movie has this crazy, Mission Impossible type plot going on. It doesn't, but I mean, it does have a pretty decent storyline, especially for something that kind of started out with very little actual story, and I think that it fits very well, and I think it also stayed very true to what the game franchise was. The fight choreography and stuff for the time was pretty decent, and I think overall the film holds up pretty well. Granted, fight choreography has improved quite a bit since 1995, but I think going back and watching the movie, it's still extremely entertaining, and it sticks very true to the heart and subject matter of what Mortal Kombat the game franchise is. And for that, that's why it earned the number 4 spot on my list. So our number 3 spot's going to see us jump from all the way from 1995 all the way to 2002. However, we're still talking about Paul W.S. Anderson with Resident Evil. Now, this has probably become one of the most successful adaptations in terms of the franchise. I mean, this has gone on to spawn at least 5 other films at this point. Supposedly, we'll be getting the final chapter of this film next year in 2017. Whether or not that's true, we'll find out. I think there's been multiple times now that we've thought Resident Evil was done as a film franchise, and they've managed to squeeze in at least one more. The interesting thing about this is that this film, although it doesn't directly mirror one of the game's narratives, it does manage to capture every single element I think you could want out of a film adaptation. I mean, they even got the creepy zombie T-virus infected Dobermans in there, so that's pretty good. And I mean, who can forget such classic lines as this?
You're all going to die down here.
And while it's not 100% true, we all didn't die down there, but I think some of us have lost interest in the franchise as it's continued to go forward, as it seems to have kind of lost its original flair. It's kind of spun out of control and just continued to get a little bit more and more ridiculous. I think one of the things that I really liked about the first film was it had a little bit more realism to him, if that's even possible to say about this, because it's absurd of a concept. But then again, I guess you never really know what scientists will come up with. Now, I know you're all dying to find out what's in the number one position, but we've got one more stop before we get there, and that's 2006's Silent Hill, directed by Christoph Gans. The cool thing about Christoph is back in 2001, he directed a movie that I absolutely love called Brotherhood of the Wolf. If you haven't seen it, I highly, highly recommend you check it out. But now back on to Silent Hill. I think for me the coolest thing about Silent Hill was it merged all the elements from the video game into the film, and it did so extremely well. It's very creepy. It follows the narrative pretty closely, especially the ending. So I think for that reason alone, this definitely is my number two. I mean, besides that, the film is wonderful. Like I said, it is creepy. It has great visual effects. It holds up fairly well. I think some of the visual effects might be a little bit aging at this point, but for the most part, it still holds up extremely well, and it leaves you with kind of that moment of what just happened at the end. Alright, so here we are, number one position. Now I just kind of want to sit here awkwardly in silence and see if you guys wait, but I'm not going to do that, but I really kind of want to. I hope that this redeems my number 5 pick with everyone, but it's a Final Fantasy movie as well. It was back in 2005. It was Final Fantasy VII Advent Children. Now, this movie, again, takes all of the wonderful elements of the technical side of Final Fantasy The Spirits Within. The animation is beautiful, the CGI is incredible, and it still holds up remarkably well over a decade later, which I think is extremely impressive. Plus, it also went back and managed to recapture all of the elements that most people were complaining about with Final Fantasy The Spirits Within. The other really cool thing about this is that we're finally getting a Final Fantasy VII remake, which looks like it's also taking some cues from Final Fantasy The Advent Children, and for that, this is why it's on my number 1 spot. It is an incredible movie, the story is great, the visual effects are wonderful, and the animation and stuff, like I said, is top notch, which is what we've kind of come to expect from Square. I mean, they have been dominating the animation game for a number of years now, and I think they're still drastically ahead of most animation studios. So, like I said, number 1, Advent Children. So first off, I'd like to say thank you for watching the video. Thank you for staying with us all the way to the end. We at Geek Elite Radio really want to develop a community of geeks that geek out on all the things that we do, and so what you can do to be a part of that is you can click the subscribe button to our YouTube channel. You can give this video a thumbs up. You can also scroll down and leave us a comment. We'd love to hear what your top 5 video game to film franchise adaptations have been. Maybe even what your bottom 5 would be. I mean, what do you think the worst ones have been? I know there's some. I know you guys have some stuff you want to vent about. Feel free to do that in the comments below. The other thing you can do is you can go to geekeliteradio.com and you can find all of our other podcasts, all the other things that we geek out on, and all the links to our other social media so that you can stay up to date with Geek Elite Radio and find awesome geek content. Until next time, I'm Richard, aka Rycohen, saying geek out. What do we want from you? We want a great video game to film adaptation. That's what we're asking of you, Michael Fassbender. That's what we're asking of you, Ubisoft. Now make it happen.